Coming up, American workers being forced to train their foreign replacements, union participation at an all-time low, and employees desperately in need of health insurance. All that and more as Labor This Week begins now. Hello, I'm Mark Harrison. We begin tonight with the workers at at&t being forced to train their replacements. The corporation recently announced that it was expanding alliances with outsourcing companies in order to replace current workers with foreign and notably cheaper labor, with as many as 3,000 finance jobs alone being moved to the company Accenture, a company that seems to specialize in keeping its headquarters in U.S. tax havens like Bermuda and most recently in Ireland. at&t denies that number of workers, yet refuses to disclose the true numbers. Other departments have been outsourced to the Indian firm Tech Mahindra, one of the top 10 companies that have requested H-1B high-skilled worker visas in the last year. The H-1B visa allows skilled foreign workers to come into the country and work for 3 years with an extension to 6, and then the opportunity to reapply. Now, these worker programs undercut U.S. jobs and belie the promises of the Trump presidential campaign in 2016. And in increasing numbers, we are seeing workers, as is the case at at&t, being forced to train the workers taking the outsourced jobs before being shown the door themselves. The way it works is that the at&t employee is transferred to the new company with the guarantee of 12 months of employment. This allows the new H-1B visa holder a year to learn the job from the person who has often been performing the work for a decade or more. And after that time spent training their replacement, the former at&t worker is told that their contract will not be extended past the 12 months and let go from the now subcontracted job. If the worker refuses to do as at&t asks, they are simply let go immediately without severance. And while this practice has been kept quiet by many corporations, at&t has some pretty exclusive partners in crime with Verizon, Bank of America, and Disney, among others, undertaking the same practice of having workers retrain their replacements. Of note, at&t received $3 billion in tax cuts last year. We'll be right back with the crisis in healthcare for far too many workers. Workers at Kennedy International Airport in New York came together in droves last week to show their support for a bill pending in the New York State Legislature that would mandate employers and subcontractors provide an additional $4.54 an hour to low-wage workers at the airport, such as wheelchair attendants and cabin cleaners and baggage handlers and others. The rally, which was sponsored by 32BJ SEIU, brought out hundreds of workers who are unable to afford health care premiums and sky-high deductibles, leaving the workers virtually without health care. Now, because these men and women work with the public at the international airport, they are especially vulnerable to communicable diseases that transit global ports of entry around the world on a daily basis. And with the most recent Wuhan coronavirus outbreak shining a new and urgent light on the situation, 32BJ President Kyle Bragg said unpaid medical bills lead to long-term financial trouble, plunging some not just into debt and poverty, but also into bankruptcy. Now, what's important to note here is that this is not just a situation unique to these airport workers in New York. The unaffordability of healthcare premiums and deductibles for low-wage workers is a crisis across our country that demands the immediate attention of elected local and federal government officials. My thanks to Joe Maniscalco of laborpress.org, who filed this report. We'll be right back with some of the labor headlines making news this week. Union membership in 2019 fell to a record low, with only 10.3% of salaried workers being members of a union of any kind. As a point of reference, membership in 1983 was 20.3%, in spite of the fact that union members out-earn their non-union counterparts by nearly 23% and enjoy more and better benefits, as well as the fact that approval by the general public of unions on the whole stands at 64%. It seems the Postal Service has been exaggerating the amount of money it has been saving by cutting salaries for new employees. Rather than the $10 billion in savings it reported, a new audit report indicates that that number is more like $8 billion, with the cost of overtime and the high turnover rates running higher than thought. The Postal Service was once considered a stable and reliable job. Since President Trump took office, 11 coal companies have filed for bankruptcy. Apparently, coal isn't making a comeback, as the president promised on the campaign trail in 2016. Indeed, with those bankruptcies go miners' jobs, and with those jobs, continued demands on federal safety nets for the miners have been stretched beyond their limits. And the state of Indiana's House of Representatives has passed a bill that would prevent companies from requiring workers to be microchipped. Yes, you heard that right. Although, as the bill, which now heads for the Senate, is written, an employee could still volunteer to have a microchip implanted. Why they would want to, who knows. If the legislation passes, Indiana would be the 6th state to do so. I'll be right back to talk about the dismal state of worker power in America. Last week, a report written by more than 70 professors, labor leaders, and activists issued what the American Prospect called an SOS for America's workers. The 125-page report calls for making it vastly easier for American workers to unionize and partake in industry-wide sectoral bargaining. In other words, everyone who builds a specific widget, no matter for what company, even if it's for a dozen different companies, gets to bargain for the same contract. The report also calls for an end to frightened at-will employees who are afraid to speak up, saying that workers should only be fired for just cause. It is a cry to all the politicians of both parties to immediately take action to fix the dismal state of employment in America before it is too late. And it slams corporations for their willingness to spend endless amounts of money on keeping workers' voices mute. The report cites a study that was written in 1971 by Lewis Powell to the right-wing U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which complained that the free enterprise system in America was under vicious attack. That report laid out a detailed plan for corporate America to spend heavily on books and pamphlets, and to fund think tanks and speakers bureaus, and to gain the ear of college professors and advertise heavily to beat back its corporate critics, most noticeably to beat back the unions. And it worked. That was a plan in 1971. The report last week calls, in essence, for the pendulum to swing back in the other direction. Do you remember these guys? They are two Air France executives who had the shirts ripped from their backs and had to jump a fence to escape an angry mob after telling workers that they were going to eliminate 2,900 jobs at that airline. Yeah, that's how the French workers take matters into their own hands. And here's a recent picture of a yellow vest protest in Paris over pension reform plans by the government. Do you know what the Yellow Vest Brigade did last week? They disrupted electrical power affecting Orly Airport and southern portions of Paris for 2 hours. These folks know how to make a point. Do you? Do we? As a group? As the majority? When was the last time you saw a rally of that size to protect worker rights in this country? Workers in France are 98% unionized. In Sweden, it's 90%. Germany has 56%. Canada and Britain both 28%. Yeah, I know. They have problems too. Well, every country has problems. That's just an excuse to sit in front of Twitter all day and complain. Yeah, well, where exactly has that gotten workers in America in the last 50 years? It's gotten us winning the race to the bottom. That's where it's gotten us. Some of you may have seen the hashtag I often use on social media, which reads hashtag majority rule. Do you remember on the playground during neighborhood games, there was always that kid who would cite majority rule, meaning that the majority of the kids who wanted to play by a certain rule got their way. We are the majority. And by a huge long shot, folks, we are the majority. The problem is, we don't act like it. Do you know that your Republican senators don't even listen to your polling numbers if you aren't in the upper 2/3 of the income bracket? Well, ladies and gentlemen, the SOS for American workers was sounded in a comprehensive report last week, and it is high time we start acting like we want to be heard. We are the majority, and if things don't start improving soon, we will have only ourselves to blame. What will you do this week to join the fight? I'm Mark Harrison. I'll see you next week.